it's Stefanos. With me, I have Felin.
Hello.
Uh, we are here to discuss the topic that has been up recently, the Kony 2012 video, and some about Africa, and we will see where the discussion takes us, basically. But I will start off with saying that I think that none of us believe that the Kony is not a bad guy. He is a very bad person. Uh,
Yep.
we both watched the video. We both feel that, but we also, at least I feel that there are some problems connected to the case, to the video, and how the situation is handled. So I will let you start with your reactions concerning the video.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I sort of, when I watched the video, what I sort of reacted to the most was not the terribleness that they tried to describe, but rather the cheesy, sentimental feeling you were supposed to get from the background sort of music that was supposed to be so neutral you wouldn't notice it, but you would get emotions from it. And also that they try to affect it emotional, and also that they're raising a really serious problem of child abduction and child armies, but they're taking up one guy, and they're trying to focus in this case. I'm sorry, bad throat. They're trying to focus this case on one guy and a few children that you see, and also I think they're doing it kind of an amateurish way, and it's not really what you'd wish for such a serious problem. I think that's some of my reactions.
Yeah, and I mean, one thing that also strikes me is that basically the video tells us that there is this uh, guy that is horrible called Joseph Kony. He's abducting children. The organization Invisible Children are trying to get the US involved. The US got involved with 100 military advisors. The US might get out of there because it doesn't have anything to do with them. But that is basically it, isn't it? And the rest, that took me perhaps 1 minute to explain. The rest of the 29 minutes, what are those basically? Those are basically scenes where he goes around with his kid, explaining to a 5-year-old the situation. Then he goes over to a scene with a Ugandan child crying, and that is basically what the movie is all about. It doesn't contain a lot of information. When I like heard replies and stuff, and you always when you hear replies, you're always expecting that the replies are a very small part of the content of the movie, because that's usually how it is. You can't simply remember an entire 30-minute video, uh, but in this case you can, and that is what is sort of scary in my opinion, because
Yeah.
there is so little information in the actual video and so much bullshit, so to say.
Yes, quite a lot of sentimental crap that's just you're just trying to affect our emotions to gain something from your cause. You're not trying to make people think that your cause is awesome, but rather they're gonna feel that your cause is awesome. You're gonna affect the chemicals that and what they see and what they hear and the songs and so on, and that this is awful. I have to support it, but not. I think this is awful, but rather I feel like this is awful. They're trying to. I'm sort of disturbing that on the point that it's not really focusing on people's intelligence to these sort of questions and awareness, but rather we have to stop this man. And seeing that the the Ugandan boy that he met for 10 years ago, I think it was, that it raises in the movie is connected to Joseph Kony. And they only later on, like last minute, bring up that children do not have to live in fear, and there's many of the kind of Joseph Konys. It makes you think that is this really something that he's like want to stop child abductors, or is this more of a personal issue because he knows this guy? I'm not saying it's wrong that he wants to stop someone who has terrified someone he knows, but I'm saying that is he doing it wrongly because he's doing it for a personal cause.
Yeah, and perhaps it is. But I mean, also in the video, he brings up this list of different kind of people that he fast scrolled through until the top, where number 1 is Joseph Kony. But in that list are some also quite serious criminals. For example, what I managed to detect in that list was, for example, Muammar Gaddafi. And it makes me kind of think, like, isn't Muammar Gaddafi, I mean, he's dead now, but wasn't he a worse guy in a sense? Because he sort of killed his own population, and he had the position of a leader. Joseph Kony he's a rebel leader, but he's not leader in the country, and that is also a point. And moreover, I think Joseph Kony hasn't actually been in Uganda for some time now, and his organization is not really strong. And the figures they bring up in the movie, like 30,000 abducted children, those figures are taken in a period of 30 years. So if you look at it, it's 1,000 children per year, which is horrible, of course, but it is not 30,000 active. It is 30,000 overall.
Yeah, but
And
every single child is adopted is sort of bad. Every single child lives in fear of bullying, of parents who beat them or do drugs or a massive abuse of alcohol. Every single child who lives in fear of something, and that includes then abduction and death, is wrong. But I have to agree with you that it's the numbers and everything going to him. I think it would be more appropriate to set up that this is the amount of people who has been abducted over the past 30 years by every guy all over the world for child labor or child slavery, or sexual abuse, or yeah, everything like that.
but I also think in a way that the movie speaks of some sort of post-colonial, uh, yeah, well, it speaks of this white man's burden, post-colonialism. Because the movie basically tells us that we have to help Uganda, that the Ugandan army cannot, that Uganda cannot help themselves. We, as a white man, have to help Africa, and that is the idea that was put forward by Cecil Rhodes, one of the worst tyrants that ruled that were in Africa during a few hundred years back, and his idea was also this, that if the white man have to help the black man, but what Cecil Rhodes did was to basically put black people into slavery because they could not care for themselves. And I think that is one of the ideas that is not spoken in the movie, but it's one of those ideas that are implied through the movie. And basically, it is this idea that we have better knowledge of how to fight a war. And I don't necessarily think that that is true, because if you look at, for example, Afghanistan or Iraq or even Iran or any other country in this world where the US has been, the end result many times have not been so good. And you have often had the population against you, which is, you have to remember.
I have to say something there. I think every country who's got very little clue up to like fight a war is quite a good country, because that means they have not been in that many conflicts. And that may be wrong of me to say, because then they might not have that much defense, but it would also mean that people would not have experienced that much war. Back to you.
Well, I mean, if you look at the US, they have been in many wars then, but they still do not know how to fight a war when it comes to these sort of situations, and that is
Yeah, that's
quite
true.
quite obvious, I would say. And if you see the Vietnam War, for example, they said themselves that they would be spreading democracy, that they would be stopping communism, because communism was something that the people did not want. But in the end, what actually made the US lose the Vietnam War was the population. The population turned against them in the Vietnam War. The population has, in many cases, turned against them in the Iraqi War and in the Afghani War. And what I would fear, if the US would increase military intervention in Uganda and in Central Africa, what I fear would happen then is that the population would actually be turning against the US as well. and then Joseph Kony, believe it or not, would actually gain some sort of legitimacy. And I mean, that is what the movie says, that Joseph Kony should not gain legitimacy, but that is what would happen, and that is a very bad thing. But at the same time, it's a very complex situation because the Ugandan army are themselves accused, and rightfully so, of abducting children, of raping women, of pillaging villages. So it's a very much two-sided issue, and I think if the situation was easy, then it would have been solved by the Ugandan army by this point. But they themselves are incompetent, so that is one of the problems, really.
Yeah, it always is. It's kind of hard to fight a battle between two sides where you basically have to choose which one is the worst one. Um, I don't have that much knowledge of sort of the Ugandan army. I don't think it's been much in the media or so. I
But
mean,
yeah, it hasn't been lots in media because Uganda is, it's not a small country, but it's not large in the perspective, and it's not important in the perspective of the world, really.
yeah, it's not that influential, and it doesn't really have nuclear weapons, and it only recently found oil, which can also be. Maybe you want to take that point?
I don't think that the oil is anything that really is a point of discussion or so, because I think that the amount of oil they have found is not something that the US would be willing to invade a country over, especially now that they have that people believe so much in this Kony thing. I think that if the US would intervene and it shows up that the US only were there for the oil, they would lose immense support.
All right, you have a point.
But also, I mean, this idea of fighting people because fighting is wrong, that is kind of strange, isn't it? Because if you believe that peace is good, then why should you start a war?
Yeah.
And if you go to countries such as Mexico and other South American countries, what you have actually found there is that when the government and the army have stepped up their military presence in the areas that are affected by drug cartels, the drug cartels have simply not sat down and said, well, we have to stop this because we are under attack. They have said, well, let's step up our attacks as well. So what you're doing is that you're meeting a problem with more problems. You are bringing a fight to a fight, and in some cases that is good, in some cases that is necessary, but often I think there is a second solution, and I think that Joseph Kony and other sort of people, they are perhaps not disappearing directly, but I think in a long-term perspective they are sort of disappearing, and I think they are losing legitimacy, and I think they have been, and I think that is one of the signals that have been obvious, is that their power have diminished, their power hasn't exactly increased, and they have been forced to go into negotiations with the Ugandan army and other sort of leading figures because they are not as strong as they could have been. And I mean, look at it in this perspective. I mean, we said before that 30,000 children were abducted into child soldiers each
Yep.
year.
No, we didn't
No,
say each year.
not each year, of course, but in a total perspective,
Yeah, we thought so, yeah.
thousand each year. We said.
Yeah.
Say that they have these child soldiers go on for about 5 years. Let's say that. I think that's a good assumption, perhaps. That
Yeah.
would mean that they have an active army of 5,000. That
Mhm.
army is about to be as Sweden's army, and we have a very little army. I mean, the U.S. military army is hundreds of thousands. So
Yeah.
they are not very strong in that sense.
No,
Uh,
but it isn't all about the army, it's the power of it, because you have to. What comes the power from? Which is the ethical problem in many areas that we just take this one up. But the power that he has comes from children he has abducted who, according to this video, and I think this video actually has a point in that part, I think I've heard it from other sources, that these children are forced to kill their parents and or maybe people they know or maybe people they love, and they have to do many awful things that if you think about the people who come home from Iraq, they might just have stood at I'm sorry, but might have not been in that much firefighting. They often need psychological help because they can't get through the situation. Now think about it. How would you react if you were abducted from your home and then the first time you would see your parents since you were abducted to this horrible situation is when you have to kill them? That puts quite a lot of psychological stress on someone who's that young. Because I don't think these people will develop all that much psychologically either after they've been abducted and forced to be in this army. But that is just what I believe.
Well, I mean, of course, these people who are in war get and develop PTSD, for example, and other stress anxiety disorders. But I mean, a point also is that look at Uganda. That is the country that is in focus, really. I mean, look at Uganda. See what kind of country that is. They're not God's given son,
No one is.
exactly. No, but we can be more or less. I mean, Uganda is a country that has been heavily criticized for human rights behavior. They are actively speaking of executing homosexual people because they're homosexuals. Okay?
Okay.
For those that perhaps do not know, the Pupu priest, Uganda. This is true. He is from Uganda. And that is not like one priest in the many. That is a general trend that is in Uganda. You have this homophobia, and you have other sort of human rights that have been effectively, well,
Neglected.
yeah, neglected and destroyed and such. Uh, and I mean, and to have and to support a country and an army which is actively doing this, what does that make of us really? What does that tell about our civilization? Does it, for me, it says something like we are willing to support those who themselves destroy lives in order to stop someone that have destroyed lives in the past.
That's an interesting point. Yeah.
I mean, why would we do that? I mean, the problem is there, but the question is how do we stop the problem? And in my
Yeah.
opinion, we do not stop the problem by bringing in more problems, but people may disagree on that point,
Yeah.
perhaps.
I agree with you that we should maybe not train the Ugandan army, who has been quite a bad army, to better warfare, to better search the jungle for people. Because think of it, how does Joseph Kony get his people, his children? Well, he goes into homes that are far located from any city and takes children. But if the Ugandan army rapes women, if they better searching through the jungle, aren't they better at capturing people who are in the jungle?
Yeah,
I might go on a long sort of path here by saying that. I don't know, but I think there is a point behind this, though.
yeah. I mean, if anyone should stop Joseph Kony, it should certainly not be the US because they haven't exactly been successful in warfare that is not on their own territory, so to speak, or territory that they are familiar of. When you're looking at, for example, Afghanistan, Iraq, or Vietnam, they had, and they have now as well, huge problems concerning terrain and how to utilize their equipment that is so much more better than any equipment that the Afghans can get, but they still cannot make a decisive victory because they do not know how to use the terrain. And in that sense, people like Joseph Kony cannot be captured simply through conventional warfare because the US Army do not know how to fight on that terrain, so they could be looking under every stick and stone and they still wouldn't find him. That is something that is quite I mean, it took like 10 years to find Osama bin Laden. 10 years.
Yeah.
And Afghanistan is not the biggest country in the world.
No.
But you also have to look, I mean, on the organization Invisible Children and who they are. And they have, and many points have come across from other people as well and have been expressed, such as this, that they're only spending some 30% on actual aid, that they are supporting armed conflict, they are supporting an army that has themselves been convicted many times and challenged of rape claims and of doing many nasty things towards people and towards human rights. But they have also been seen with the Sudani army on some occasions, and Sudan recently split due to an armed conflict because they simply could not, in a friendly manner, decide between them how the crisis would be solved. And Sudan was one of the major refugee crises of this last decade, I would say. Perhaps, I mean, you had these huge refugee camps, and Invisible Children supported that conflict. Why? Really?
Yeah. I haven't heard of that, but I'm going to take your word for it. And I also think that the Invisible Children isn't that I don't know all too much of these conflicts, I have to say, which is bad when talking about it. But the name Invisible Children says that they wanna sort of lighten up the Invisible Children. But are they? You have to correct me on this because I think you know a bit more than I do. Are they really taking up children from every single part of the world in every sort of house or family or uh, how you say it?
No, of
Uh,
course not. They're focusing on Uganda.
yeah, yeah. Because I think many children are suffering, and I know that people want to rather focus on the uh, poor children in Africa. And yeah, people are poor in Africa, but some have it better than here. Not all of them. Not I don't even think the majority have it better than here because of this lack of human rights. And human rights says that everyone is equal worth, even if you're a girl, boy, or if you're 12 or 24. But like here in Sweden, we've got plenty problems with people being bullied, people who feel miserable all their life because of it, and also try to take their lives, and also children who grow up with parents who are neglectful and mistreat them. Even though we have laws against them, we have laws against beating children, uh, and who drink heavily and take drugs and so on. And I don't mean to dislike the problems in Uganda and other African countries because they're so important. They're so important that children everywhere gets the chance to live in a proper home, live with proper heating when it's cold outside, with proper food, proper water, and proper school that they learn their own home language as second language. That's awful important in my opinion. And they know how to count. They'll be able to fulfill their dreams. But I think if you have an organization called Invisible Children, you're not supposed to go on Joseph Kony. You're supposed to go on children soldiers and people being bullied and people being mistreated and people who are not seen. Joseph Kony, you're watching one man who's what, in his 50s? And you're trying to enlighten children by going on this man, but the video, in my opinion, told more about the horrible person Yusuf Khan was and how we're supposed to do things here I'm sorry, there in the US and all over the world, but not so much of how are these children actually feeling. It was, yes, it was part of this Jacob person, and I feel for him. I hope he's getting a good life now. But every single other person in this army, how are they? Why can't they lighten that up and make a point about protesting at the end and not do it like half the movie?
Yeah, they're not actually focusing so much on children. They're focusing on one child in Uganda, and it's not even focusing really. I mean, they spend 5 minutes maybe max
Yeah.
of mentioning him, and then they sit and talk to his 5-year-old goddamn son for like 25 minutes.
I actually sorry for his son, because when you're 5, I at least didn't know about the world wars until I was 7, and by then I didn't even know what it properly means. But 5-year-olds, you should not be connected to these kind of events in the world. And I know they wanted to make a point, and it's important for children to know about things in the world that's happening. But when you're 5 years old, I think that the best thing you can focus on is living your life, because you don't want to have any like psychological problems from that age, because you were so focused on everyone else. You have to be more focused on you the younger you are, and you have to stay innocent for a while.
Well, I don't think necessarily that is true. I think you can be I think that you can care for other things in the world than
Yeah,
just
that's true, but
yourself.
I don't think that it can sort of, yeah, people are being uh
But no, but
trying,
not, that's not
they
the
should not
problem.
try to, I don't think you should try to make his son understand. Okay, that's sort of personal, and no, it's not really what
But I
we're
don't
to
think
say,
that it's
but
relevant because I mean his son, he can do whatever he likes with them, and I think it seemed like his son. I mean,
yeah, okay,
okay,
but
maybe it's wrong to like uh for I mean what I think though is wrong is to in the purpose of a movie purposely use his son in order to make a point. I think his son might not at the age of 5 be fully aware what he's gotten into, or even I don't know even know if he had a choice to be in the movie. Perhaps he had. Um,
I think he
but
had, but it,
he's very young, and it's a question if he's old enough to actually know how the world would react to him and such. I mean, he went from invisible himself into world famous over a night, basically. I
yeah.
mean, 74 million views on YouTube. That's not saying 74 million people, but it's many, many million people uh, who actually knows who he is now. Um, but
It's
I think that
76 even.
76 even, yeah, it grows quite rapidly each day. But I think the point though is that they they are using his son uh, not as a way of informing people, but a way of using people. They're appealing to emotions, and they are effectively saying that look at this kid, look at how he understands the world. So why shouldn't you understand the world when you're so old? Um, and I think that they use many sort of techniques like that to influence their viewers into an opinion that the viewers perhaps don't know about themselves. And I think what they do, even if Invisible Children would have been a good organization, there is a flaw with this, and it is that you make people believe in a cause which they did not know anything about, because the only thing that they have been told about the cause is through a 5-year-old boy and some emotional pictures of people doing different
Yeah.
things, and of people crying, and of people cheering and such. You get a lot of emotion then, but people are not actually getting smarter from the movie, and that's the problem.
I have to say
Because
though that something that I sort of caught on was that they wanted to change the propaganda, and not to remove propaganda, but change it to their own way. So they, I don't know if it's nice to say it, but it seemed like they were saying something like, we want to do our own propaganda, but propaganda is not something good. It's trying to effectively brainwash people to think what you are thinking.
yes, and I think when you look at it, when you look at the actual situation, there has been many sort of different things like this uh, over many years. I mean, colonialism started in the like the 1800s, the 1900s, and such. Um, and what we are trying to do now is fix our own mess,
Yeah.
because effectively we caused this video, so to speak. If it wasn't
Well,
for
yeah.
us, there wouldn't have been so much corruption. If it wasn't for us, there wouldn't have been so many liberation armies, etc. And I think
I'm not
look at
sure
the
if what you're saying is 100% sure. I'm going to agree with you that there would have been less corruption, but I think some small percentage of corruption would always have been there because there was corrupt warlords even before the Europeans came. But it was not in the sense that people were forced together on a little bit of land where culture differences is so strong that there's going to be fights everywhere.
no, but
So
look at Rwanda.
yeah,
Rwanda is directly south, not very far from Uganda. And what the Belgians did in Rwanda was to say to one part of the population, 10%, that you are the leaders now. You have 10 cows, so you can lead the population. And to the other, these are the Tutsi then. And to the Hutu, the 90% of the population, they said, you have less than 10 cows, so you are supposed to follow the Tutsi now. Then they used this tactic called divide and conquer to effectively do that. And that culminated in then the Rwandan genocide
yeah,
some
but I
100
was
years
trying to make a
later.
point that this would still be corruption, but there were less. And I agree
No,
with
but
you on that
they
point.
wouldn't.
I'm sort of mad on every single Belgian from that sort of time period that let that happen. Uh, Not angry at Belgians today because Belgians today have absolutely nothing to do with it. They make great chocolate though. Uh, but yeah, quite a lot of things that are wrong with Africa are actually the colonization, the imperialism, if you want to use a nice word, which I think is just awful. It is that it is the fault of that.
But then what we have done now, the last 40 years or so, is to give a lot of aid to Africa. Okay? And aid sounds very nice because it's a gift from us to them. And you would think, well, if I got $100, then I would be very happy. I could spend that. But in some ways, it have destroyed Africa more than it has helped them because if you look at, for example, the Cold War, you had this division in Africa between communism and capitalism. Those who were capitalists, they got money from the US. Those who were communists, they got money from the USSR. And this has been in every country, basically. And aid has been done in this way even after the Cold War ended. And what is wrong with this type of aid is that it forces the country to do sort of bad things that are not fit for that country. For example, a Swedish company or a Swedish governmental bureau may go into a country and say, well, you have to build steel industry now. This aid is designed for steel industry. And then the people in Uganda or Somalia or in Cameroon or in another country cannot simply say no because then they will not get aid. But at the same time, they do not have need for any steel industry. They would have need for better farm equipment. They would have need for better pharmacy, for example, better healthcare, and other sort of things like that. And at the same time, we are putting up very, very strong barriers for exports from Africa to Europe and to the United States. That makes it very hard to sell grain and other sort of products that goes from Africa to Europe. And that makes it hard for them to actually. What we are doing is that we are still destroying Africa by. We are destroying incentives in the countries, for example. Um, when we're saying, here, take this $20 million um, to the government, they and the government do not actually care about people. The government will simply take the money themselves, and then they will say, well, maybe we made some improvements, and we cannot see the improvements. So that further emphasizes corruption in these countries, and uh, that is what creates situations like this. When you have so much power at stake, you will have when the political system is very corrupt, when the military system is very corrupt, you will have the possibility as a person to rally people and fight uh, against the population and against the government because the government themselves have no support. And that is a problem because if the people in these countries in Africa would have supported the government, then why would the Lord's Liberation Army exist? they only exist because the government are incompetent to do anything, and that will simply not be helped by the US sending a lot of troops and a lot of money to the military, because they will further emphasize the problem. It will further create a problem. And I think, I mean, we have been going on this discussion for about, I think, 35 minutes now. So I think that it is time to round it off, so to speak, and to end our arguments now. You can start then, Felin.
Okay, yeah, well, in the end, I think this video is enlightening a problem in the wrong sort of way, and they're doing it so wrong that the focus may be that Joseph Kony is an awful person, is that he and many others are doing a crime. So I think that if they should want to do moves in the future, they should rather sort of see themselves to a more audience that actually gets the capability to think instead of blocking out everything to emotions. And that people in general should listen to their minds more than their hearts when it comes to these sort of issues. And also that these sort of things happen all the time. People being raped, abducted, mistreated all the time. And it's not like it's gonna change just because you enlighten something at this point in time. You have to change it actively every day. And that's sort of what I think.
Yeah, I will agree with you on that point. I think what the problem is with the video and with the topic is that it makes people dumb. That is basically my conclusion. It makes people dumb, uh, and it does not help the problem. Aid has been so damaging for such a long time in Africa, and it does not require much studying to understand how harmful aid has been in Africa in many situations. Therefore, I think that this video further creates that problem, further helps creating a problem which have been going on. And I think that it is time for a change in when it comes to aid and when it comes to helping Africa. And we should not see Africa as a problem. We should see it as a possibility, as a way that we can change the world, not by crying for some children, but for actually learning ourselves. Because despite what we think, we have a possibility to learn from Africa, and that is something that we should realize. And I think that this video only makes people, it doesn't make people smarter, and that is exactly what Africa needs.
Yeah. So if you want to actually learn more about this, Google, Wikipedia, uh,
You
read The
can,
Economist, possibly. Try to actually broaden your minds more about how this issue is caused and what is a realistic way to solve this, and not just only how do we stop this horrible person because emotions from a movie told me to.
yeah, I think you can first of all point, if you can point out Uganda on a map, if you can point out Somalia on a map, if you can point out South Sudan on a map, Rwanda on a map, and if you can actually tell me what those countries have done and what are the problems in those countries, I think you should start by actually making sure that you can do that. And then you can learn about all countries in Africa. Uh, it is impossible to know everything about Africa. And that is why we have documentaries and such, to make sure that we get this over the top knowledge. But we should make sure that documentaries are knowledge that we can build on, instead of knowledge that is it's dead. So that is what we should make sure to do.
Yeah.
Um,
So educate yourself, think critically, and most of all, help when you think that help is needed and not just follow every single documentary.
Glad to have had you here, Felin. Uh,
Yeah,
I've been Sofonos.
and I'm Felin.
We will see you